All right. Yo, what's up? My name's Patrouski, and I wrote a really long script for this, and I have a lot of things that I want to say, so go ahead and get a snack, get a drink, relax, and just try to appreciate what I'm trying to say. I put a lot of time and effort into it, and if you disagree with me, that's totally okay. That's actually welcomed in this kind of video. Let me preface by saying a lot of what I'm going to say here is some turbo nerd shit, and only applies if you care about PokeMMO to the utmost degree and care about efficiency or good argumentation. This might not be the video for a lot of people, and I super respect that. A lot of what I'm going to say right now are actually my feelings, so please feel free to agree or disagree respectfully. Having said this, I have been so vehemently disappointed by the discourse over incubators and chum buckets. The main positions come down to some people like incubators and like chum buckets because they believe they increase the accessibility to these hyper rare shunts like egg hunts and fishing and are still rare enough to feel the mystique of those shunts. This is a based and valid opinion. And then there's the other side that believes the mystique or emotional impact of getting a shiny is lowered too much by this update and it hurts the value of shiny hunting. This is also a based and valid take. There are two valid sides, yet here we are on the internet. People still manage to get caught up on semantics or use bad argumentation to act like the other side is fucking crazy and there's no holdable position there. This is happening on both sides and I condemn both of it. Being charitable is something I constantly encourage here on my channel, which essentially just means understanding why your opposition could come to that conclusion in a reasonable manner. I'm sure you all know that I'm a big fan of the that I'm not a big fan of the chum buckets and incubators. But I also stand by the fact that it's a super valid take for people to prefer them and think that they could even move the game in a positive direction, even though I disagree with that. But I hope that I'm wrong. I have this charitability towards an opposing view, and it makes me so sad that I don't see the same courtesy being extended to me or other people with my position. Almost everyone I have seen, from Reddit to forums to Twitch chat to YouTube chat, whatever, everyone arguing for the chum buckets / incubators assumes the other person is just gatekeeping, doesn't want their shinies to be devalued, and just like a bad person, doesn't care. I can speak as someone who does not care at all about my past achievements being devalued, quote unquote. I achieved that thing in that moment because it meant something to me. I don't care about comparing to others in that regard. I feel like I am one of the biggest advocates of new players and casuals in PokeMMO. New players keep the game alive, give us a fresh perspective, spark joy, and can also become veteran players very quickly. Many of the quote unquote veteran players right now in PokeMMO who are against the changes have quote unquote only actually been playing the game for 2 to 3 years. I think the gatekeeping and devaluation arguments are scapegoats to not having to actually engage and critically think about the issue. In short, once again, if you cannot understand how someone could come to a position in a reasonable manner, that's a big red flag to me. You want to come up with the strongest argument possible against your own argument, and people aren't doing this here. However, anyone making arguments about devaluation of their own personal shinies instead of the devaluation of the feeling you get when you get a shiny is not someone I agree with. And now let's jump into some actual facts and numbers. Get my handy dandy Windows calculator up, a regular on this channel. People have been saying that the time it takes to make Pokeyen for the egg hunt is more time consuming than the making of the eggs and the actual grinding of the hunt. And that's why incubators are actually okay, because you're only speeding up a small part of the hunt, aka only the hatching part. I can speak from experience. As someone who has egg shunted for a shiny for a Cranidos, it took me 17 months to achieve this. Lots of on and off gameplay, let me might add that. Now, a lot of my numbers are going to be off, and a lot of my numbers are going to be a bit off, and we will get to today's numbers in a second. But my old numbers from 2+ years ago are relevant, and we'll explain why. For example, for my Cranidos hunt, I spent 10 hours a day usually hunting when I was actively engaged with the hunt, which was obviously not every day. But I would spend 1 hour making 380 to 420 eggs. So 1 hour was spent making the eggs on average, around 400 on average. I would spend 7 hours hatching those eggs, and then 2 more hours buying ditto boxes and box sorting. Those 2 extra hours could have actually definitely been sped up or turned into 1 hour or 0 hours with more efficient play. And now with incubators, you can actually definitely turn that into 0 hours because you can hatch while making more eggs all at the same time. I don't aim to or pretend to be the most efficient player in PokeMMO. I'm far from it, but I enjoy understanding the best strats. So 7 out of my 10 hours were spent hatching. Now that doesn't include the time to make Pokeyen. So let's calculate that. And this is where we run into 3 different paths that we could go down, and that's very important. Let's just start with path number 1. I'm going to vaguely touch on path 2 and 3, but I really want to focus on path number 1 for this video, which is the most charitable path to my opposition. Imagine path 1 is imagining that you hard grind for all of your Pokeyen. This means that gym reruns, Elite Fours, this is you doing gym reruns, Elite Four reruns, breeding for profit, etc. This does not include flipping or investments, which are the main 2 ways people pragmatically fund egg hunts. But in this imaginative scenario, you should still be able to make 400,000 Pokeyen per hour constantly. Now that's going to sound like a lot to a lot of people, but remember, egg hunts are literally the hardest shiny hunts in the entire game, aside from alpha shunts, but those are just a type of egg shunts. Literally the hardest shunts in the entire game and require end game levels of money making. You should be making 400,000 plus Pokeyen per hour if you're at the end game. If we take the 160 million Pokeyen that you needed on average for the hunt, that number is different. Hear me out. I'm aware that this number has actually changed in the modern era. But we're going off of my Cranidos numbers for now, and I'll explain why. I promise, okay? Hear me out. But if you take 160 mil Pokeyen and divide it by the 400,000 Pokeyen per hour, which you can definitely make at endgame very consistently, this is the worst case scenario, you end up with 400 hours needed to make the Pokeyen for the egg hunt, right? This is what the hunt looked like before the egg buff 7 months ago during the last event season, and also prior to the incubator buff, okay? This is what the old shunt used to look like. 400 hours making the Pokeyen. But to get the hours you spend hatching, you take the shiny rate, 30,000 divided by 400, which is the average eggs you would see in a batch, old batch, and you would get 75 batches of eggs. 75 batches times 7 hours to hatch each batch gets you 525 hours of hatching. Once again, this is the most charitable numbers possible to my opposition. This is more hours, obviously, 525 hours versus 400 hours, if I recall correctly. More hours than the time it would make to make Pokeyen, which is extremely relevant because one of the number 1 reasons I wanted to make this video is because I keep seeing people comment saying that the time it takes to make the Pokeyen is longer than the actual hatching part of the hunt itself. So that's why incubators are actually okay, because you're only speeding up a smaller part of the hunt versus the Pokeyen's the big problem, right? This is objectively, factually, by every metric false. Well, until the post-incubator patch. Now, with 8 incubators, people are hatching 120 eggs per hour at the highest level of efficiency. But you know what? I like to assume some human error. So let's say that you missed 2 batches, you missed 2 egg ticks. Let's say that someone's hatching 110 hours to give some more charitability to my opposition. And keep in mind with the temp incubators, if those get added after Shiny War, it would be up to 225 eggs hatched per hour. That is 225 eggs hatched per hour, up from 60 to 75. That's post temporary incubators versus prior to all incubators. Versus 110 or so versus 225 permanent incubators versus temp. These are the numbers that I'm being told from the best shunters in the game, and I do want to say that I have not practiced these methods personally, and I want to be honest and upfront with that. I don't want to give you guys any sort of false representation. My position could be flawed. This is from my understanding. But with the 110 eggs hatched per hour with the current permanent incubators, with a shiny rate of 1 in 30,000, so if you do 30,000 divided by 110, we get only 272 hours spent hatching. With permanent incubators, you went from 525 hours to egg hatch for a rare shiny in PokeMMO down to 272. Now, let's extend more charitability. I'm not very good at math. So you know what? Let's assume I fucked up somewhere. Let's round the 525 number down to 500. And let's round the 272 number up to 300. Even if you do that, it is still a 200-hour difference. You have shaved 200 hours off of the shiny hunt, or 40% of the hunt. Or at least that part of the hunt, 40% of the hatching part of the shiny hunt. So when people say that adding incubators is actually okay because it is not the most time-consuming part of the hunt, money making is, even assuming we are on path 1, which, keep in mind, we haven't even gotten to path 2 and 3 yet, which are the more realistic and pragmatic paths. This was objectively and fundamentally not true until they added incubators. People are using the result of a change to justify said change. This is dangerously scary argumentation, and in my opinion, insanity. Once again, there are two valid positions, but somehow we are finding our way into the weeds of terrible argumentation. This would be like if someone told you, hey, you need to go to the hospital, and you said, no, I don't. I actually feel fine. And then they shoot you in the stomach and say, ha, yeah, you do. You're using the thing that you said to justify your prior position. You're just using the change to justify said change. It makes no logical sense. However, let me take a breath for a second and be even more charitable. I think that a lot of what's happening during this very tumultuous time of PokeMMO, where people are sleep deprived and exhausted from shiny wars, is that people are looking for ways to quote unquote logify their solution, their position. They want to be right and they want the other person to be wrong, when that's just not the case. If you want chum buckets and incubators in the game because you believe the feeling of the shiny is still good enough and those hunts were way too hard in the first place, I think that's so based and so fair. And I love you for that position, even though I respectfully and kindly have a deferring opinion. You don't need to logic check that opinion. It is a valid feeling. If you think that if you think that the feeling of getting a shiny is being devalued by these changes, that is also totally based and cool. We shouldn't be expressing hostility towards each other over these disagreements. We shouldn't be using bad arguments. It is okay to disagree. It is not okay to pretend that your way is the only way and look for incorrect logic or incorrect argumentation to paint that picture. Now, I'm going to be switching back into opinion mode for a quick sec and wrap up path 2 and 3 because I don't want to waste my entire life talking about chum buckets. I really didn't want to talk about them more and more, but we've grown a lot with this dialogue and conversation in the scene, which has been beautiful. And I wanted to clear up misinformation as opposed to the two positions existing in themselves, if that makes sense. Now, path 2 would essentially involve investments in flipping into the equation. If you're an endgame PokeMMO player, this is how you would normally make your Pokeyen for your egg hunts. And if you've ever done an egg hunt, you understand why the claim of it takes more time to make the Pokeyen than the hunt is so ludicrous. I know that this is an anecdotal and an emotional argument, so I apologize for being a bit loose in that way. But if you've done the activity, you understand this. I feel like we are in this time zone, in this era of PokeMMO, where people who don't play the game or don't do the activities are arguing for those activities. I don't actively play PvP, and you will almost never see me weigh in with an iron fist on PvP takes. I will weigh in occasionally with massive qualifications, almost always bringing up the fact that I don't actively play PvP whenever I express a feeling about PvP. You can express whatever feeling you want, but if I started to bring in facts and numbers, you would never see me. You would never see me start bringing facts and numbers into trying to explain why something is busted. I can give an example. Recently, I said, hey, maybe we should look at, I think people should maybe look at, I don't know, right? I don't know, but I'm curious what doubles players would think. Is Zapdos okay? I saw that Zapdos had a 57% win rate that is generally considered too high for most competitive things, whether it's trading card games or Pokemon or whatever it is. Once you push that 55% win rate or higher, that's a bit of a red flag, especially in Pokemon. That 57%, it's a little high, right? I didn't say, oh, I think Zapdos is broken, just because that one number does not tell the whole story. I said, I'm curious to hear what doubles players' opinions are. I'm curious what people's thoughts are. I don't know. I always qualify. But anyways, back to the main talking point. All right, back to path 2, okay? And path 2 is all about how investments and flipping is how most endgame players pragmatically make their Pokeyen for an egg shunt. So that has to be factored in as well. It's hard to, how do you calculate that? How do you run numbers for something like that? I don't know, and I'm not here to do that today. But I do want to give you an example. These are my investments from the the New Year Lunar event. That was back in February/late January. This is not including my investments from Halloween, Christmas, or any other years of investments. Within 3 months of investing 70 million Pokeyen or 77 million Pokeyen in these investments, I was up 70 mil, up to 140, 150 plus million Pokeyen. Now, 5 months after making these investments, I'm up 64 mil. So I actually lost a little bit by holding on to these for too long. Good lesson there. But let this be a good example. This is how endgame players are making their money. They aren't grinding gym reruns for 500 hours. You grind gym reruns for the upstart capital to flip/invest, and then you do that. And I think that's something that running all of these numbers doesn't factor in for. The rich do get richer in PokeMMO. I know it sucks. I agree with you. But at least in PokeMMO, we're all born in Pallet Town with equal resources, unlike the unfair elements of real life. PokeMMO might be the most fair shake you'll ever get in life. You should appreciate it while you can. Except for credit card swiping, but that's a whole new problem. And it is really hard to calculate how much money people are expected to make on investments and flipping. It's just all a little too, it's just too intangible. I'm sure there are people who are better at math who could actually do it. I'm not there, right? Now, on to path 3, which I won't be exploring in this video too deeply because I think it is very convoluted and actually deserves its own video. And I don't think we're ready for it as well. Path 3 would be exploring the idea that money is zero time, which is a concept that comes from the RuneScape skilling community, where you are basically expected to play alt accounts to money farm to fund all the progress on your main accounts. This is obviously very extreme. It's not something I would care for personally, but hey, if you want to talk about efficiency, this is what it looks like. It's having multiple devices just to play more PokeMMO, to make Pokeyen, to play your main account more efficiently. I do think within a few years, Pokeyen being zero time will eventually become an adapted concept for PokeMMO. I've seen this happen in the past with old school RuneScape. Many players already do this at endgame content, using alt accounts to make most of their money while they shiny hunt purely on their main accounts. Plenty of people ditto farm on their alts while doing hordes or other free shunts on their main account so they can stock up Pokeyen, or even more extreme, having multiple different accounts or doing berry farming on 10 plus accounts. This is a very common thing you see people talk about a ton. We just haven't gotten to the Pokeyen being zero time full concept. Like mentally, human brains take time. Change takes time. We haven't gotten there yet. I haven't gotten there yet. I don't really want to be there, but it's going to happen. That's efficiency. So to anyone saying that speeding up hatching is fine because it's not the main part of the hunt, I leave you with this. You may not like it, but this is the hunt. And I think there are even arguments for changing that and having hatching not be the main part of the hunt. But I feel like time should be added on in other areas to compensate from that, as opposed to just cutting the difficulty and cutting the time it takes to do the rarest shiny hunt in all of PokeMMO by right now with permanent incubators around 40%, and when temporary incubators get added, around roughly 300%. All right, thanks for watching. I really didn't want to make another video on this topic, but I can't stand bad argumentation, probably to a fault of mine. I hope that I portrayed my ideas without being too hostile. I am a very passionate person, and sometimes that shines through in a bad way and is a flaw. Thank you for your time, and I love you for whatever takes you may have, as long as you're not hurting anybody in the process and understanding of the opposition. Have a great day, and enjoy PokeMMO, whether you're shiny hunting or not, or whatever you're doing. Have fun, play the games you enjoy, and spend your time loving life. Yo, what's up? Outro Patrouski here, and I wanted to take this time to say thank you to everyone who goes above and beyond and supports my channel. Your names are all listed here. You make it possible for me to make helpful and mildly entertaining content for the game that I love and make it available for free for everyone to enjoy. Thank you so much for allowing me to even be here.